For years, I said it. I will never live with my dad. I wasn't being angry. I wasn't avoiding my responsibility. And I had a solid caregiving plan, one that allowed me to support both my parents, but from a distance. This plan protected peace. It preserved our relationships. And my husband and I were in full agreement. We were helping and it was working. But recently, after the death of my mom, all of that changed. Not because we are now living in a crisis. It's been about 5 months, but because God has stirred something up inside me, a quiet change in my thinking and in my beliefs about my calling of being a caregiver. It has given me an internal clarity that I haven't had before. And right now, we are in the process of moving in with my dad. And I want to take a minute and talk to you about what's really happening here. Not just the logistics of moving, not just the messy middle that we are living in, but spiritually, because this isn't about moving. This is about a calling. And maybe right now you're asking the same question. Am I being called to be a dementia caregiver? And how would I even know? Hey, Christian Care Companion. Welcome to Dementia Caregiver Support for Christians, the podcast where we live in the messy middle of caregiving. My name is Lizette Klute, and right now I am literally living in the messy middle of a move. Today's episode is a solo reflective episode. It's just you and me, and we're going to talk through what it looks like and what it feels like to go from helping from a distance to actually moving in, to discern and to accept a call you once said you'd never take. So, if you're standing in front of a decision you didn't plan for, this one's for you. And if you haven't yet joined me for one of our monthly workshops, they're free. And the next one is tomorrow, Saturday, August the 9th at 12 p.m. Eastern. We'll spend about 2 hours together in the messy middle. We will look at 3 unusual mistakes Christian caregivers make in their caregiving season and how to navigate the caregiving season with peace and clarity. You can register at thinkdifferentdementia.com/WSL. I would love to see you there. Now let us get right into episode 275, how to know whether you are being called to be a dementia caregiver. Many people understand a calling in terms of a sacred call versus the thought of a secular call. So many people understand calling in terms of pastoral ministry or perhaps mission work in general. You'll often hear people say things like, we've been called to the mission field, or I feel an internal call to be a pastor or a ministry. But a calling is not just in terms of ministerial work or sacred work. It can be and should be considered in terms of all of our different stations and places in our life. In today's episode, we're going to unpack what it is and whether or not you should consider whether you're being called to be a caregiver for somebody living with dementia. Martin Luther said, There is no work, however vile or sordid, that does not glisten before God. And I believe it was Calvin that said, and I could be wrong, but if you are going to be a street sweeper, be the best street sweeper that you can be to the glory of God. And so we're going to look at this today in terms of four different points. You know, I love my points, right? The first thing we're going to look at is, what is a calling? The second thing is, we're going to look at callings having two dimensions, an internal call and an external call. The third thing we're going to look at is, you can be placed in a position or role without feeling called yet. And please note the yet. And then lastly, biblical principles help you to be discerning and not just make a decision, right? So those are the four things that we're going to look at today. Like I mentioned in the introduction, right now I am living in the messy middle. And this episode may actually be reflective of the messy middle, because I have tried 4 times this afternoon to record this episode. I try to record my episodes a week or two in advance. It is Wednesday afternoon at 5 p.m., and this episode will go out on Friday. And because my environment is messy, because I'm living between three, in essence, different places and trying to consolidate and make thousands of micro decisions all the time. Do I keep this? Do I throw this away? Consolidating my household with my dad's household. I literally am living in the messy middle. And I've switched topics this week. I've thought of different things I wanted to bring to you. And this one, the Lord really put on my heart earlier to talk about whether or not, or how to see, or how to even think about your caregiving journey in terms of being called. And we don't think about being called to be a caregiver. We think about caregiving as a job or a duty or a responsibility or things that we need to do, tasks on a checklist, all of these different things. But what I'd love to propose to you today is that if you have a person that you love who needs help in any shape or form, that we are being called to be their caregiver. Now, what that looks like practically may be a lot of different things, and that is not what this conversation is about. This conversation, today's episode, came about because of two recent conversations that I've had with two separate people. Well, the first conversation that I had, which actually preceded and prompted my husband and I making the decision to actually move in with my dad, was because I had a conversation with a local one-on-one client who is supporting her husband who lives with dementia, and he is 58 years old and she is 58, and she wants to work. And she has two goals. The first goal is she wants to be able to work as long as she possibly can. And the second thing is she wants to be with her husband. And she's been struggling with paid caregivers not being reliable and calling out in all of this different drama, which is another conversation. However, in my conversation with her, I asked her, I said, what are you willing to give up or do in order to achieve your goal of being able to continue to work and stay with your husband? What are you willing to do? Because we can come up with a solution for that. And the solution I proposed was way out of the box thinking. And it was enough of a pause for me to stop and say to myself, Lizette, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to quote unquote sacrifice in order to meet and or achieve your long-term goal, your husband and your long-term goal of when your caregiving season is completed to be able to do foreign mission work? What are you willing to do? And I prayed about it. I went to sleep that night. I woke up the next morning. I said to my husband, what are you willing to do in order for us to be able to achieve our long term goal, recognizing that caregiving is a season? It's going to end at some point. And my husband and I want to go into foreign mission work. And everything we are doing is to set us up for success to be able to do foreign mission work in the future. And so that was the one conversation. The second conversation was with a person who came onto the Ask the Dementia Coach a couple of months ago. And something she said really struck me related to calling, because she mentioned that she felt resentful. She felt very resentful of the fact that she was her mom's caregiver. She's an only child. Her episode aired this week, episode 274. And it really made me stop and reflect on whether, is it always wrong for your external call and your internal call to not align? And then I've had another client over the years who is a wife who obviously says, I don't want to be the caregiver. And her actions follow. And so it's been this mess in my mind related to this and related to calling as a Christian, as a caregiver. So what is calling? A calling is a providential placement in your life for God's purposes, and it has an internal and an external component. It is where your life and your responsibilities and your purpose meet. And it is where we stay faithful to where God has placed us. That is what a calling in essence is. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 17 says, only as the Lord has assigned to each one, as God has called each, in this way, let him walk. So a calling is not just, in the pastoral ministry or a sacred thing. There's not a sacred secular divide in calling. It is something that we all are. We are called to certain roles, tasks, and assignments. And your calling can change over time. I'll use two very specific examples in my life. I am 100% sure that my 30 years as an occupational therapist, I was called to be an occupational therapist. And I was extremely gifted and good at what I do. And I loved my calling as an occupational therapist, 100%. I can also 100% say with 100% conviction that I have been called to be a pastor's wife. And I can also tell you there was a time in a season where I flat out said, I didn't marry a pastor. I don't want to go to seminary. And the Lord is good and kind, and we'll bring it up again in the third point where we talk about sometimes we haven't grown into that particular calling, that the Lord does call us to something, but that we aren't there yet and that we have to grow into it. And so without a shadow of a doubt, I know now that my internal and my external call for certain things do match, right? And I also 100% know that I wasn't called to certain places and stations in my life that were possible and available because they're not there. I'm not in those positions. So that's the first thing. We briefly looked at what it is, what a calling is. It's a providential situation that God places us in. And the second thing is we're going to look at is callings are to be understood in two specific dimensions. We have an internal call and an external call. And it's been very interesting because I've been thinking through this a lot over the last couple of weeks. An internal calling is oftentimes the thing that we see and understand when we have an internal desire, an internal sense that we are called to be something, that we are called to do something. So, very specific examples of that might be a man who believes he is being called, has an internal desire or an internal call to be a pastor. For example, a single woman or a single man who has an internal call or desire to be married, and or a woman who has a desire, an internal call to be a parent, a mom. And then there's an external call. An external call is an external validation of an internal feeling. And so the external call for these specific examples are a pastor, a man who has gone through seminary training, who is now being called by a particular church to serve in a particular geographic location. Or if you have been praying for a godly spouse, and you are desiring with an internal call to be married, that God provides you with a spouse. Or a woman who is desiring to be a mom who becomes pregnant. There is an external validation of an internal feeling. And that's one way that callings play out. But there is also a second way that callings play out. And the second way that a calling plays out is one of the ways that it plays out in caregiving. There is a external call due to a situation or a circumstance that God has providentially placed you in that makes you a caregiver. Mine happened at 19 when my mom had a humdinger of a stroke. I came home from going out. I was 19, went out for dinner with my friends, and I came around the corner and pulled into the driveway to see the ambulance outside and my mom on the way to the hospital with a hemorrhagic stroke. Hindsight's 2020. We were blessed with 30 plus more years of my mom. She never should have survived her original stroke, but she did. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. And so externally, the Lord placed me in a position to become a family caregiver from that moment on. However, ironically, because I haven't understood and I haven't been looking at caregiving through a biblical model, through a biblical perspective, because I got sucked into the medical model, sucked into the medical world, I never had an internal recognition or an internal awareness of being called to be a caregiver. You may not be called initially to be a caregiver. And so my dad was my mom's caregiver. And providentially, in a caregiving situation, sometimes the circumstance is there first, and then the internal call develops later, or Lord willing, the internal call should develop later. And so thirdly, what we're going to look at is you can be placed in a role without feeling called to do it yet. But if you are called to do that role, the Lord is good and kind and gracious and patient, patient with us to let us grow into a specific role over time. I'll go back to my example of being a pastor's wife. I will never forget My husband wanted to go to seminary to become a pastor years, I kid you not, years before I was willing. Our conversations went on round and round. He's like, I want to go to seminary. I'm like, I didn't marry a pastor. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Right. And the Lord was kind and gracious and gave me time to catch up to the internal call. And so, guess what? The external call was there. My husband is a pastor, and I am now a pastor's wife. And the same thing has happened with my business, with the podcast, with everything that I am growing into. I wanted to start a business and I wanted to serve family caregivers of people living with dementia. And when I was thinking through this podcast, I came up with all sorts of names. And at the beginning, it was going to be Dementia Caregiving for families, and then Dementia Caregiving for Christians. And I flip flopped back and forth. And I could not, and I didn't want to step into this space as a Christian. So I went with Dementia Caregiving for families. And eventually, the Lord changed my heart and made me realize and grew me into the internal awareness that my role is supposed to be to serve Christian family caregivers. And so you can be placed in a role without feeling called to it yet, and then grow into it. So, particularly, this can happen in caregiving. So, the external call sometimes comes first, right? And so, you can, for example, the person could have a stroke, like my mom, right? The diagnosis of dementia, the person can fall, whatever happens, the thing, right? And so Proverbs 16, verse 9 says, "The mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps." So I can't tell you how many people have told me, I have no choice, right? And your station and place matters, right? If you're a spouse, if you're a sibling, if you're the adult child, those things matter. You have been providentially placed in those specific roles. But the Lord gives us agency, always, always gives us agency to make a choice. We have a choice in how we respond. And when we don't make an active choice to respond, that is where resentment lives. That is where our thoughts come out. But I deserve better. I don't know about you, but I have often felt, but I deserve better than that. No, I don't. I deserve the wages of sin, which is death, right? But being called to be the caregiver doesn't mean necessarily that you're being called to be the hands on caregiver. It doesn't mean necessarily that you need to stop working and move in. But what it does mean is taking ownership and making active decisions. And so in my situation, I felt when my dad got sick a few years ago, I did feel the internal call to be a caregiver, but not as the hands on caregiver, not as the caregiver living with my dad. I kid you not, I have said for years, I will not live with my dad. I will not live with my dad. Well, guess what? The Lord overnight changed my heart and aligned the external call with the internal call. He had already given me that external call of being the caregiver. And now the Lord and only the Lord and the Lord's Spirit could change my heart overnight. I have no shadow of a doubt that we are doing the right thing and that we are being called to be the live-in caregivers to my dad. Philippians 2 verse 13 says, "For it is God who is at work in you, both to desire and to work for his good pleasure." I'm not doing this for me. I'm not doing this for accolades. I'm doing this because number one, it is the right thing to do. Number two, the external and the internal call align. Number three, there is a part of this season that will end, and it puts us in the position to be able to do the thing in the future that we feel being called internally to do, which is foreign mission work. And it is a good part of our stewardship on this journey. So that was the third thing, the third point. And now, lastly, we're going to look at biblical principles will help you discern, because this is a part of being discerning, wisdom. Wisdom. Biblical principles help you discern, not just decide. The Bible will give you structure for the right discernment. And I'm going to look at three underneath this, three things that you can work through on your own. The first thing is the fifth commandment, right? Exodus 20, verse 12, in essence, talks about honoring your father and your mother, right? And so it is good and right for us to honor our parents when we are adult children. Yes, we are to honor our parents. It gives us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to live with them. It means that we need to honor them. It means that if you were abused by your parent as a child, you do not necessarily become the hands-on caregiver, but you honor them by helping make good and wise decisions with and for them. The second thing that the Bible teaches us that gives us structure for discernment related to caregiving is leaving and cleaving. Genesis 2, verse 24 says, "For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife." And so if you are married, you are now a unit. And if you are a husband caring for a wife, you are still a unit. And that means that the Lord has provided, given you an external call through your circumstances to be the caregiver to your spouse. And my dad has a lot of faults, but I will tell you one thing I will never fault him for. My mom had a stroke when she was 42. My dad will be 80. And for 55 years, he was her primary caregiver, and he did a good job of physically and financially taking care of her. And so we have to factor that in. If you're the married adult daughter or the married adult son being a caregiver to your parents, you do have to honor them, but you've left and cleaved. And so we'll use this as an example. There's a couple of family that I met with a few months back, probably over a year ago. And the husband told me, my wife and my mom do not get along, and did not hire me and did not ask my advice, but then moved his mom in. Well, guess what? It didn't work because they left and cleaved. And yes, he was trying to honor his mother by bringing her into the house. But the secondary relationship of leaving and cleaving, not the I was born into this family relationship, actually supersedes your relationship with your parent. And it did not work out well for them. His mom ended up being placed in a facility. They declared bankruptcy because they made unwise decisions, because they did not use a biblical structure for discernment when they were making this decision. And so the last one we're going to look at here is station and providence, because yet again, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 17 says, "Only as the Lord has assigned to each one." The Lord puts us in stations, and his providence is your external call. It is up to us to follow in obedience. It doesn't mean that we do not think these things through, but we have to factor in exactly where we are. And if you are the adult daughter who is the caregiver of a parent, and your husband isn't 100% on board, you cannot move your parents in with you. You cannot move in with your parents. Your spouse supersedes your responsibility and your relationship with your parents. And so these are biblical principles that will help you be discerning when you make your decision. And so if you're struggling with this type of decision, I invite you to come to the free workshop I have this weekend. We talk about a lot of these different kinds of situations and help build it out in a practical theological perspective. This is where the rubber meets the road, right? Yes, the Bible doesn't tell us exactly step by step what to do. And the Bible tells us exactly what to do step by step in a caregiving journey. And so I hope today's episode was encouraging to you. I really do hope it was encouraging. I want you to think about your caregiving through the lens of whether you're being called. Because if God has placed this particular situation in your life, then he has given you an external call to this particular station. And we will never, ever, ever be fully aligned until we can work on our hearts, right? So your caregiving journey is not a detour through your life. You're not being taken off track. The woman who said that, she has some resentment related to being the primary caregiver of her mom. One of the things that sticks out in my mind is that the statement that she made that said, we got married young, we had kids, and we were kind of waiting for all of that to be done so that we could get on, so we could have this time together because we didn't have it at the beginning of our marriage. Caregiving is not a detour off of your life. It is forming you into the person you are supposed to be in God's eyes. We are kingdom focused. We are focused on where we are going in eternity. And the Lord doesn't make mistakes. He has put this particular situation in your life at this particular season for a specific reason. And so, with great excitement, I have moved in with my dad. I don't harbor any resentment. I'm not angry about it. I'm in the middle of the messy middle. It's not fun being in the middle of the messy middle. I can't find anything. I'm making thousands of decisions about stuff. And having said that, I 100% know it is my calling. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I have total alignment between the two dimensions, the internal and the external. And I know that sometimes we are placed in a role that we don't feel called to yet, and that it is part of your sanctification and your growth to grow into it, in particularly in relation to caregiving. And then lastly, the Bible does teach you principles in how to be discerning when you're making these decisions. And yet again, if you're struggling with this, hop on my calendar. I will take 20 minutes and have a conversation and see if it's the right fit for you and I to work together. If you're looking for some free coaching, hop onto the next Ask the Dementia Coach. That is an opportunity for you to receive some free help from me. And as I try to remember in the messy middle to end all of my podcasts, may the Lord bless you and keep you. And I pray for you every single day that the Lord prepare and provide the right help for you at the right time. And so I look forward to seeing you in our next episode, where we are going to talk about another coaching style episode. I'll see you next week.